Thanks for coming on such a fine day when it's probably everyone wants to be outside. For those who I don't know, my name's James Donaldson. I'm the Executive Officer for Wet Tropics Waterways, which is the regional report card partnership for the Wet Tropics. Today, I'm basically just going to give an overview of the latest waterway health report card for the Wet Tropics, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions. Unfortunately, the brains trust behind this operation, Richard, has gone overseas. He's on holidays at the moment, but I'm happy to take any of those really technical questions on notice and get back to you. All right, so I'll start with a bit of an overview, a refresher for those that aren't familiar with the partnership. So in really simple terms, Wet Tropics Waterways works with a whole range of different partners, so local councils, university, community groups, industry groups, private enterprise, to monitor and communicate about the health of our waterways in our region. So most of the data that we use to keep an eye on the health of our waterways comes from our partners who are out there collecting it, and they share that information with us. So our region spans from Wujal in the north to the Herbert in the south. Oh, sorry. So as I mentioned, we have a very diverse range of partners. So all levels of government, industry partners, community groups, as well as research institutes as well. So the regional report cards span most of the Great Barrier Reef catchments, excluding the Burdekin and also the Cape York. So there are 5 regional report card partnerships with Gladstone in the south and Wet Tropics Waterways in the north. And so the regional report cards are different to the reef report card. The reef report card is the one that focuses on things at a much broader scale, and they also are more focused on tracking progress towards targets, whereas the regional report cards are focused more on regional waterway condition. So Wet Tropics Waterways is not just about the report card. We have a range of other initiatives. So some of you may have been at the launch on Wednesday night, where we also launched the Reef and Rivers magazine. So this is the 3rd edition, and it's essentially a bit of a complement to the report card. So the report card is a bit of a high level overview of the grades from each of the reporting zones across our region. And the Reef and Rivers magazine is a bit more of a lifestyle magazine, and essentially just showcases some of the great work that our partners and others are doing around the region for waterway health. And we mix that up with articles, lifestyle articles like boating and fishing and camping and all those things that basically rely on waterways and are really central to our lifestyle up here. We also have a podcast, so the Reef and Rivers podcast. That's season 5. It will now be released over the next few months. So every fortnight or so, we'll release a new episode. So there's some really great episodes coming up. Joe Morano will be on there. He had a particularly interesting one. And there's a whole bunch of really interesting podcasts coming up. And finally, the other thing that we do is forums. So every year or so, we host a regional forum where we bring in experts from around the region or around the country to come and talk on a particular theme. So the last one was shared solutions, which was really interesting, where we thought, all right, we're all working in different industries, but we're kind of dealing with the same issues. Let's come together and share our knowledge and our solutions to those shared problems and challenges, and see whether we can find some common ground. All right, so let's have a bit more of a look at our region. So the Wet Tropics is broken up into a range of different reporting zones. So we have 9 freshwater basins there that are colour-coded, so from the Daintree in the north to the Herbert in the south. We also have 8 estuary zones that we report on as well, scattered along the coast. We have 4 inshore marine zones and a single offshore marine zone. So in each of these zones, we're looking at different things, different indicators to be able to get a sense of waterway health in that zone. So obviously in the freshwater basins, we're not looking at things like coral and seagrass, where, you know, that's for the marine zones. In the freshwater basins, we're looking at things like riparian condition and fish barriers and fish communities and water quality and all sorts of things like that. So as you've probably gathered, this report card is not just about water quality, it's more of a holistic kind of look at waterway health, and it includes things like litter. Well, it will include things like litter and human dimensions as well, which is the social value side of our waterways. So there are a few new additions and updates for this year's report card. So the first one is a pretty extensive project that Terrain and RM have been running over the last few years, which spans across the wet tropics, but it is looking at fish barriers. So fish barriers can be take many different forms. So in that photo there, you've got pipe culverts, even bed level crossing up causeways, box culverts. There can be chemical barriers. There can be other physical barriers like aquatic weeds that choke up a river. There's a whole range of different fish barriers. And so the Terrain project has been mapping and ground truthing and prioritizing all of those fish barriers across the wet tropics. So we have, in this year's report card, we've added in new fish barrier data for Dixon Inlet, the Daintree catchment, and the Lower Barron catchment as well. Our partners CAFNEC, so Cairns and Far North Environment Centre, they run the Mangrove Watch program for the wet tropics, and they work with citizen scientists and volunteers to collect mangrove condition data for us across the wet tropics. And so this year they've expanded that program to include the Moresby Inlet and also the Hinchinbrook Channel. So that has been added to the report card this year. And we've also included the urban water stewardship, so round 2 of the urban water stewardship framework. So the urban water stewardship framework is essentially like BMP, or best management practice, but for urban water management. So what we do is we hold workshops with each of the 8 councils in the wet tropics to assess how they're going in managing their water in the urban environment. So 66 different areas there that we look at. And so that has been updated for this year to add on to the baseline we did 2 years ago. Another couple of quick updates. So after a couple of years of being out of action, pesticides are now being monitored in the Mossman again, which is great. And the long-term monitoring program has tweaked their coral monitoring design. So they're going to be doing fewer reefs, but they're going to be doing them more often. All right, let's dive into the results. So just a reminder that these results are for the 2021 to 2022 financial year. So we'll cast our mind back to that. So we'll start with the overarching climatic context for that period. So rainfall was average, although the dry season was wetter than average, and the wet season was drier than average. We also saw that sea surface temperatures for inshore and offshore zones were higher than the long-term averages during the summer months. So that put a few areas into coral bleach, high-risk coral bleach watch. So if we start with the basins, we can see in this table here, I'm not sure whether you can see my cursor, but in the far right column, we have the overall grades or scores for each of the 9 basins. So they're color-coded. So the dark green is very good, the green is good, yellow is moderate, orange is poor, and red is very poor. So as you can see there, most basins were graded as a B overall, except for the Daintree, which was an A, and the Barron, which was a C. So DIN, or dissolved inorganic nitrogen, was the poorest scoring water quality indicator again. So this is a fairly common trend we've seen through the years. But one thing we've done, and one thing you'll see throughout this presentation, is some longitudinal data back to 2015. So these graphs here are generated by our new dashboard. So it's a way of communicating trends through time. So all of this, most of the data that we have goes back to 2015 when the report card started, and each of these lines correspond to the basins that we monitor. So if we look here at the plot for dissolved inorganic nitrogen, there's a fairly clear delineation between these three up here and the rest. So the top three here are the Daintree, Barron, and Johnston. So fairly consistently good or very good in terms of scores for DIN, but they're kind of let down by the rest of these catchments down here that are consistently either moderate or poor for DIN. The other thing I noticed here for phosphorus, for FRP, is that although it's fairly stable for most catchments, there is a slight declining trend there. So that's something to keep an eye out for over time. One of the big stories from this year was around pesticides. So this is a really good news story, and I'm glad to see a couple of people here from SRA and other people that were probably involved with this program. So I'm not a sugar person, and I'm not a technical person, so excuse me if I get the facts a bit off. But essentially, Tully Sugar, HCPSL, SRA, the MIP, and Smart Cane BMP have all been involved in an extension project that's aimed at reducing the use of imidacloprid. And so that started around 2017. And so I guess this sounds like the focus of that project was around reducing the inadvertent use of imidacloprid for pachymetra rather than cane grub. You can see here in this plot that use kind of, starts to plateau off as that program starts to roll out in 2017. You can see this data here, I should say, is for the Tully only, but we've seen that trend continue, and it has been seen across other catchments as well. So that's really good news. If we have a bit more of a look at some of the data, so this plot here, these stacked bar charts show the relative contribution of each chemical to the pesticide risk matrix. So the color we're looking at here is this sort of dark brown color, which represents imidacloprid. So if we look at the Mulgrave for this year's reporting, you can almost see that color is non-existent after dropping down from 2017, 2018, 2019. Similar in the Russell, similar in the North Johnston. There's been a big decline there in the North Johnston, in the Tully, and also in the Herbert. So that's a really good sign that some of these the stewardship actions that are happening and the extension programs that are out there are translating into detectable results. So that's really good news. The other update is for estuaries. So all of the estuaries, so all of those 8 estuaries that we have in our region that we monitor were graded B, except for the Barron and the Moresby. So you can see here that there was a decline in estuarine scores for this year. And that was largely driven by poorer water quality scores. So here we have some more of those plots from the dashboard, and they're showing that estuarine water quality scores did decline for all of our estuaries, and that was largely driven by chlorophyll A and nutrient scores. So obviously, more nutrients you have, more chlorophyll A you have. So phosphorus and DIN both declined, and that in most catchments, in most estuaries, sorry, and that corresponded to a decline in the chlorophyll scores. So that's what was behind the decline in estuarine grades overall, and that's potentially linked to some of that unseasonal dry season rainfall that's spiking the nutrients in our estuaries there. The other thing for the estuaries was estuarine seagrass. So we can see here that Trinity Inlet declined to a poor grade after having a couple of good years. So The driver behind that was that the meadows that we have in Trinity Inlet are quite small and they don't have that species diversity. So they're dominated by those ephemeral pioneering species, and they don't have those sort of long-lived species and the species diversity there. You can also see that the Moresby's really not in a good way. It's sort of just bumbling along in the very poor category there. But the good news there, so the Moresby population got wiped out in Yasi and has really struggled to recover. That seed bank was almost entirely removed. So what has happened in the Moresby is that Mike Rashid and his team from JCU, also Ozfish are involved, and they are rehabilitating that meadow. So that's the first time in tropical Australia, at least, that a meadow scale rehabilitation has been undertaken. And so the pilots have been very successful. And the good news is that they've just got funding to continue that for the life of the project, which is really great. They're doing an excellent job. All right, inshore marine. So all of the inshore marine zones, so there's 4 inshore marine zones improved, and the nutrient scores for the inshore zones actually improved in all of the zones. So what we can see in this plot here for oxidized nitrogen and particulate nitrogen is that the red and the orange and purple ones, these two here are south and central zones. So these ones are being consistently sort of dragged down by poor scores for particulate nitrogen and oxidized nitrogen. And the interesting thing about the inshore marine nutrients in particular is that there is really, I guess it's obvious, but there is a clustering around river mouths for a lot of the nutrients. So that's what's dragging some of the scores down there. Good news for the inshore coral cover. So the coral cover has increased in all zones also this year, which is great. Interestingly, though, the overall scores for coral condition have remained fairly stable. So even though the coral cover is increasing, some of the other metrics we look at, like juvenile recruitment, are actually trending downwards. So that's kind of stabilizing that overall score. But good to see that coral cover is increasing. And finally, for inshore marine, there has been an improvement in inshore seagrass. So we only have data for the north and south inshore zones, but they are both increasing, improving, and they've been on that trajectory since about 2017. So that's really good to see. Okay, finally, for the offshore marine zone. So for a second year in a row, we haven't been able to source water quality data for the offshore zone. So the Bureau of Meteorology had a program that we relied on for that data, but that has been discontinued, unfortunately. But the good news is we're working on a replacement and it should be ready for next year's report card. In general, the offshore water quality is fairly good and it is fairly stable. So we're not expecting anything major to have happened out there in the time that we haven't had data for it. The other good news is that hard coral cover in the offshore zone has increased to its highest level since 2016, which is awesome. And there's been, I guess, a bit of a reprieve from cyclones and pots during that time. So, so they have improved. And also in terms of COTS, they have so the boats that go out there have detected no potential active crown of thorns starfish outbreaks. So that's also good news for the offshore zone. So that's probably it, but there's obviously more to dig up. There's a lot deeper you can go if you're interested. So probably the best resource is our new dashboard. So that QR code will get you straight there. But we do, obviously our website is a really good resource for lots of other things. There's a 130-page technical report if you're really, really keen. And so you're able to see a lot of the data there and a lot of the methods and understand how these scores and grades are calculated. But that dashboard is really useful. You can explore by reporting zone, by catchment, and by indicator as well. So plenty to explore there. I guess before I finish up, I'd just like to acknowledge all of our partners. As I mentioned at the start, it's not possible to do what we do without their financial and in-kind support, which is really, really valuable to us. So big thank you to all of our partners.